Happy Quasimodo Sunday, everyone! Yes, I've finally done something right, and in this case, the right thing that I've done was have a video prepared about Quasimodo and had it released on Quasimodo Sunday, so that's really cool, and the coolest thing about it is nobody actually knows what year in which I began working on this video, so it's an all-around win for Beagle Rampant Productions here. Today we are going to take a look at everybody's favorite literary character named Quasimodo, and of course I'm referring to the Hunchback of Notre Dame, who appears in Victor Hugo's classic novel Notre Dame de Paris, or as we know it in English, The Hunchback of Notre Dame. We're also going to take a look at the 1923 Universal Super Jewel film, and we are also going to take a look at the 1996 Disney animated film, and we're going to take a look at an opera by Louise Bertin, and Victor Hugo himself actually wrote the libretto for this opera, so sit back, relax, this is going to be another kind of lengthy discussion video essay sort of thing here on Beagle Rampant Productions, so make use of those chapter breaks, take lots of breaks, come back whenever you need to. I know I'm going to take a lot of breaks while filming this thing, but sit back, relax, and we're going to take a nice journey back to 1482 and see what's popping at Notre Dame. So before we dive into the meat and potatoes of this video, I thought I should get some housekeeper disclaimer things out of the way. I'm going to bump into a lot of words that I don't know how to pronounce. There's some Polish words, some Greek words, and of course a whole lot of French words. I don't speak these languages. I looked up the pronunciations the best I could, and I think I got them, but I'm probably going to end up butchering a lot of really beautiful languages here, and for that, I apologize. So, just, letting you guys know, you're going to hear some pretty ugly pronunciations coming up here. And I also didn't really rehearse this video too much, so yeah, almost everything I bump into is going to be a complete surprise to me, so don't be as surprised if you see that I'm constantly looking at my notes. It's just, we got a lot to talk about anyway, so with those housekeeper disclaimer things out of the way, let's dive into the content. It's Quasimodo Sunday. You guys are probably wondering, what on earth is Quasimodo Sunday? And Quasimodo Sunday refers to the second Sunday of Easter. In the Catholic tradition, Easter Sunday is actually the beginning of a much larger liturgical season of Easter. So the Sunday after Easter Sunday is the second Sunday of Easter, and we call it Quasimodo Sunday. And typically the gospel reading is from John chapter 20, verse 26, where Jesus appears to the disciples after his resurrection, and the disciple Thomas isn't in the room, and then Jesus leaves, Thomas arrives, and his response is, well, unless I can put my hands in the crucifixion wounds, I'm not going to believe that Jesus has appeared here. And so, later on, Jesus appears again, and Thomas is in the room, and Christ invites him to put his hands in the crucifixion wounds, and his response is, my Lord and my God. And Jesus says to him, you believe, Thomas, because you have seen me, but blessed are those who believe without seeing. So that's the gospel message of the second Sunday of Easter. And we actually call it Quasimodo Sunday because of the Mass's introductory phrase, and that comes from the first letter of Peter, and now I'm going to butcher some Latin for you guys here. Quasimodo geniti infantes, alleluia, alleluia, alleluia. rationabile, sine dolo las concupiste. Whew. Alleluia, alleluia, alleluia. Yeah, so, Latin scholars, how'd you like that, huh? Yeah, you won't get that out of your mind anytime soon. Translated, though, it's, as newborn babes, alleluia, 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 desire the rational milk without guile. Alleluia, alleluia, alleluia. And so, from this we can kind of gather that Quasimodo means in like manner, in the same fashion. Quasi means half, almost, semi, kind of, and modo means the form, the manner of, the fashion. So, yeah, that's kind of, those two words, so in the same manner, kind of like, that's basically what Quasimodo could be translated to. There is another translation that is perfectly valid for Quasimodo, and we are going to take a look at that when we jump into the Disney film, and I think Victor Hugo might have had this in the back of his mind when he was developing the novel as well, so just bear that in mind. There is another translation that is perfectly acceptable here. But, your priest at church today probably didn't say anything at all about a Quasimodo Sunday, but he did probably talk extensively about a Divine Mercy Sunday. So Pope John Paul II declared that the second Sunday of Easter to be Divine Mercy Sunday, and he declared this on the 30th of April 2000. Yes, that was one day before my 11th birthday, and that was a fun birthday. We went to McDonald's, and we went to a McDonald's that was kind of a good distance away, so we could also hit up Blockbuster and do the Pokemon Snap download thing where you can print out your photos from Pokemon Snap. But you guys aren't here to hear me reminisce about my past birthdays. You're here to learn about Divine Mercy Sunday. So April 30th, 2000 was when Pope John Paul II declared the second Sunday of Easter to be Divine Mercy Sunday. This was also the day that he canonized Sister Faustina Kowalska, and in 1931, she received a vision of Jesus, and in this vision, he asked her to paint the image with the inscription, "Jesus, I trust in you," and that the second Sunday of Easter would be a feast and a celebration of divine mercy. And not being trained as an artist, Faustina went ahead and commissioned the artist Eugeniusz Kazimierowski to paint the image of Jesus with the inscription, "Jesus, I trust in you." So that's essentially Divine Mercy Sunday, Quasimodo Sunday. You probably aren't going to hear the term Quasimodo Sunday too much in the Catholic Church nowadays. You'll hear Divine Mercy Sunday a lot more, but, just for the context so you know where we're coming from here. And now, we're going to go on and discuss the book, Notre Dame de Paris, or as we know it by its English translation, The Hunchback of Notre Dame, written by Victor Hugo, and the book was published in March of 1831, and there's an urban legend that in order to complete the novel on time, he locked himself in his room and didn't bring any clothing with him, his idea being that, well, if I don't have any clothes, I can't go out. And we actually know this to not be true. This is just an urban legend. One of the major inspirations of Hugo's novel is the destruction and disregard of the medieval architecture in Paris that occurred all throughout the 19th century. There was even a discussion of demolishing Notre Dame itself because the church had fallen into such bad disrepair they were just kind of seriously considering tearing it all down. In the preface of the book, Hugo describes a Greek word, oh boy, anarchy? I guess, Anagi, I hope, that was carved in the walls of Notre Dame. The term translates to force, necessity, constraint, but it also relates to the ancient Greek goddess Ananke, the supreme ruler of fate and destiny. She's the sister of Kronos and the mother of the three fates. And because of this connection to Ananke, the ancient Greek literature sometimes renders this term, that I'm not going to try to pronounce again, as
fatality.
This is the meaning that Hugo is going to use throughout the novel. From the actual text of the preface, Hugo writes, "The wall was whitewashed or scraped down, I know not which, and the inscription disappeared. For it is thus that people have been in the habit of proceeding with the marvelous churches of the Middle Ages for the last 200 years. Mutilations come to them from every quarter, from within as well as from without. The priest whitewashes them, the archdeacon scrapes them down, then the populace arrives and demolishes them. The man who wrote that word upon the wall disappeared from the midst of the generations of man many centuries ago. The word, in its turn, has been effaced from the wall of the church. The church will, perhaps itself, soon disappear from the face of the earth. It is upon this word that this book is founded. March 1831. So there's also a note on the term of archdeacon. In the Middle Ages, the rank of archdeacon was pretty common, and most of the men were studying to become priests. They were potentially able to enjoy a lot of responsibility in terms of clerical discipline and management of finances. And, I mean, Victor Hugo will use the term archdeacon and priest interchangeably to describe the character Claude Frollo, so, I'm not, and it's not exactly clear to me whether, Frollo was studying to become a priest, or if he had achieved it, but he had a title of archdeacon. I didn't really grasp that. Maybe I'm slow on the uptake, but hey, anyone watching this channel knew that to begin with, huh? But, in 1553, the Council of Trent pretty much did away with the title of archdeacon. They left a few cathedral titles intact, but by and large, the archdeacon was pretty much limited to liturgical duties only after the Council of Trent. So let's dive into the plot of the novel. The year is 1482, and the people of Paris are enjoying the Festival of Fools. Pierre Gringoire, a struggling poet and philosopher, is trying to persuade the people, don't watch the parade, but watch the play I had written. And only one guy watches Gringoire's play, and his comment is a resounding, yeah, it's stupid enough. At the parade, Quasimodo, the one-eyed, hunchbacked, deaf bell ringer for Notre Dame, is crowned the Pope of Fools. Quasimodo became deaf from ringing the bells all of his life, and this was very frustrating for Quasimodo being deaf. It was losing a major connection to the outside world. Claude Frollo, the Archdeacon of Notre Dame and Quasimodo's guardian, arrives and commands Quasimodo to return home to Notre Dame with him. Gringoire, looking for something to eat, follows the enchanting Romani street dancer Esmeralda and her performing goat Jolly, and he ends up in the Court of Miracles. The Court of Miracles is where all of the Romani street beggars hang out, and there's a joke that it's where the lame beggars walk and the blind men see, i.e., the people, when they're on the streets of Paris, they're pretending to be blind, but then they return home to the Court of Miracles, and, oh look, all of a sudden they can see. So, and Gringoire follows the enchanting street dancer and her dancing goat Jolly, because he wants something to eat, and he also thinks Esmeralda is really, really hot. And while Gringoire is following Esmeralda, Quasimodo attacks Esmeralda at Frollo's urging. Frollo, kind of like everyone in Paris, has a mad, lustful obsession with Esmeralda, so And I just find that weird, you know, it's like, really? I mean, there aren't any other hot Romani girls in the Court of Miracles. There aren't any other really, really hot girls in Paris. Everyone is just madly obsessed with this one particular individual, but I don't know. But Claude Frollo has a psychotic and kind of very much dangerous lust for Esmeralda, so he urges Quasimodo to attack her. Pierre Gringoire tries to assist, but Quasimodo knocks him out. Captain Phoebus of the King's Archers rescues Esmeralda and apprehends Quasimodo. Frollo escapes. Esmeralda falls in love with Phoebus. So when Gringoire ends up in the Court of Miracles, the leader of the beggars, Clopin, puts him on trial and they agree to hang Gringoire. Esmeralda, trying to save Gringoire, agrees to marry him for a period of 4 short years. She doesn't have any actual feelings for him, and he's kind of bummed about that, but he gets the wedding feast, and that was what he was looking for in the Court of Miracles, so there we go. So he gets to live, he gets to eat, and Esmeralda asks Gringoire, what does the word Phoebus mean? And he says that it is a Greek sun god. And we learn that Esmeralda doesn't really know anything about her past. She doesn't even know what her name means. Ooh, I can help you with that one. Esmeralda, it's Spanish for emerald. So, I finally knew something. Feels kind of good. After the wedding, we have Book 3 of the Hunchback of Notre Dame, and this novel is one of those books where it's one book, but it's divided into a whole bunch of other books with different chapters. You know, a lot of books back in the day kind of did that thing. You can tell your English teacher that the random YouTuber guy said you can go ahead and skip book 3 because it's really, really wordy. A lot of the novel is really, really wordy, but book 3 is particularly challenging to get through. The important thing is much of Notre Dame is being demolished or redone without any regard to its historical significance, and Victor Hugo is very much against that. And it's maybe less so from the spiritual side of it, because Victor Hugo is concerned with matters of social justice, and he's very much against the things like aristocracy or organized church and religion. But he does like the absolutely beautiful monument that mankind had designed and built. So, yeah, and I mean, I don't want to oversimplify Hugo's views on spirituality, but he definitely wasn't a staunch Roman... when he died, he wasn't a staunch Roman Catholic by any stretch of the imagination. It's a lot more complicated, Hugo's spiritual relationships, and that's way more than we're going to get to in this video here. But so after book 3, we get some character development. Claude Frollo, after the death of his parents, had to raise his little brother Jehan, and Jehan did appear a little earlier in the novel. His character is basically, he's a rough and tumble party kind of guy. He likes to get into some fights, likes to get into some trouble, loves hanging out at the tavern. So that's but he's certainly not dumb or poorly read. He definitely is an intelligent young man who is certainly educated, but yeah, he definitely likes some mischief, and that's basically his character. And Claude was relatively young when he had to raise his brother, who was practically an infant at the time. Claude Frollo had to grow up way too quickly, and he sort of retreated into a world of books and study. The people of Paris had murmured extensively that Claude Frollo was some sort of an alchemist and a sorcerer, and one Quasimodo Sunday, a baby was left on the steps of Notre Dame, and the people were shocked by how hideous the baby was. Claude Frollo stepped forward, calling out that he would raise the child, and he would name the child Quasimodo because he was discovered on Quasimodo Sunday. And then the people began to murmur even further that the sorcerer and alchemist had adopted a demonic familiar. And we also learn a little bit about Quasimodo. He had a deep, passionate love for his job as Notre Dame's bell ringer. He even named the bells. He adored the Cathedral of Notre Dame, and when he became deaf, that was his last connection to the outside world, because, physically, people didn't really want anything to do with him. You take one look at Quasimodo, you run the other way. But conversation was a way he could let people see that he had a really good heart and was really passionate about his faith. So yeah, it was definitely a challenging thing for Quasimodo to lose his hearing after the constant ringing those bells and the echoing and the reverberation. Yeah, if you do that for a few years, you're bound to get some hearing loss there. And picking up with the plot, we witness Quasimodo's trial for attacking Esmeralda. So bear in mind, Quasimodo is deaf, and the judge who heard his case was also deaf, and the people were reminding the judge, hey, Quasimodo's deaf, he actually can't hear you. But the judge, also being deaf, when he hears that, he says, oh yeah, is that the case? Well then, I'll add some more time and a couple of lashes to his punishment. Which, his punishment was being tied to a rotating wheel in the town square, and we have here, obviously, Hugo commenting on the standards of justice. Real justice doesn't really seem to ever be served for the poor and the outcast, is Hugo's idea here. At his punishment, the people ridicule and throw things at Quasimodo. He begs for water, and Esmeralda goes up to the wheel and gives him a drink. So after this point, Esmeralda saved Gringoire from being hanged at the Court of Miracles, and she gave Quasimodo a cup of water, so those are her nice deeds for the novel. She spends the whole rest of the novel oscillating between being a total victim or an absolute bitch. So there's really not much else to really like about Esmeralda's character, I think. She's very just kind of a terrible person, by and large. Nearby, locked up in a tower, is a recluse named Sister Goudelet. She hates the Romani, she especially hates Esmeralda, because years ago, the Romani stole her baby daughter. And yes, this is going exactly where you think it is. A few months pass, and we see episodes of Frollo working his alchemy and teaching a student, mostly connecting stories and images of the Bible to the alchemical processes, and Jehan swings by to ask Claude for money, and he witnesses him carve the Greek word that I pronounce so beautifully in a wall as he curses Phoebus. Jehan is asking Claude for money, and Claude's response is, the end will be bad, and Jehan says, well, but the beginning will have been good. A few nights pass, and Phoebus meets with Esmeralda at an inn, but they are followed by Claude Frollo in disguise. People refer to this persona as the Goblin Monk, which sounds really, really cool. Frollo stabs Phoebus multiple times. Phoebus survives the attack, but is pretty badly wounded. Esmeralda is apprehended for the crime, and she is put to torture. She does a pretty good job of resisting the confession, but once they get those thumb screws in her, she sings like a canary and confesses falsely to the crime. And again, this was the standard of justice back then. You didn't have the Eighth Amendment, so torture was a perfectly legitimate option, and after enough time getting tortured, you probably would be ready to confess to just about anything. Frollo visits Esmeralda in prison, demanding that she accept his love for her and he can get her out of this situation if he only receives her love. She refuses, wants nothing to do with him, and she's led to her execution. Phoebus refuses to recognize her at all, and he goes off to his arranged marriage. Before she's executed, though, Quasimodo swoops down from the top of Notre Dame, grabs Esmeralda, and calls sanctuary. This is one of the most heroic and inspiring episodes of the novel, and Esmeralda is now in religious sanctuary, which means while she's technically under the protection of the church, she cannot be turned over to the government officials to be executed. But this also means she can't leave the church. So Victor Hugo makes a connection. The thing that you use to protect unjustly condemned prisoners still makes them a prisoner. They're just a prisoner at a really cool-looking church, which is kind of cool, I guess. I mean, if you had to be in prison somewhere, might as well be a church, but freedom is always the better opportunity. Quasimodo and Esmeralda form a kind of uneasy friendship as her sanctuary goes on. At first, it's definitely kind of awkward and scary, but eventually they warm up to each other, and they have trouble communicating, but they develop a nice rapport after a couple of days of her sanctuary. Esmeralda wants some word from Phoebus, so Quasimodo agrees to go out and search for him. When Quasimodo finds the archer, he doesn't want anything to do with him, and he doesn't care about Esmeralda anymore. Quasimodo spares Esmeralda's feelings by saying, well, I waited for him, and I waited, and he never showed. And she angrily says, you should have waited all night, and at that point she doesn't want anything to do with him, and Quasimodo is absolutely heartbroken, saying that, wow, I guess looks really are the only thing that matter. And they don't really interact too much with the whole remainder of her sanctuary period. That fight definitely didn't do wonders for their kind of uneasy friendship there. On another night of Esmeralda's sanctuary, Claude Frollo takes the red presence candle that we use at the Eucharistic Tabernacle, and if you've seen my church vlogs, you know that this is a very important lamp, the red sanctuary lamp. Sanctuary lamp when she's in sanctuary, but we do call it the presence lamp, the sanctuary lamp. But this is a very important lamp because when that light is on, it means that the Eucharist, the actual body of Christ, is in the Eucharistic Tabernacle. The only time we don't have this lamp lit is on Good Friday, symbolizing that Christ had been taken away from us, leading to his crucifixion. So this is a pretty serious sacrilege for Frollo to just take this lamp to go up to Esmeralda's room to sexually assault her. Quasimodo, unaware of who's trying to attack Esmeralda, goes after Frollo, and Frollo runs away. Now Frollo, who totally sees that it was Quasimodo who attacked him, Quasimodo doesn't realize that it was Frollo trying to commit this act. Frollo's now jealous of Quasimodo. Later on, Frollo meets Gringoire on the streets of Paris and tells him that the royal parliament had voted to end Esmeralda's sanctuary. Gringoire then informs the Romani leader Clopin about all of this, and the Roma forces converge on Notre Dame to try to bring Esmeralda to safety. We also have a scene involving King Louis XI, and here Hugo depicts them as being miserly and utterly disconnected from what's going on in the country. Again, Hugo, he loves to heavily criticize the aristocracy, the church, organized religion. In a lot of respects, organized religion is one of the things that keeps Frollo so repressed, and this repression leads to very horrible outcomes and actions towards Esmeralda. So by being so strict, Hugo's viewing the aristocracy, the monarchy, the church itself as enemies of freedom, creativity, and just passion and your natural instincts. The differences between Frollo and Jehan in a lot of ways. Jehan, he's not going around trying to sexually assault anyone, you know? But the king, he's miserly, totally disconnected from everything that's going on in Paris, and he orders troops to Notre Dame to stop the Romani forces from attacking the cathedral. In a tragic twist of irony, Quasimodo believes that the king's forces are there to help Esmeralda, and Clopin's forces are there to harm Esmeralda, so he begins throwing everything he can. Hugo mentions that there were workmen improving the cathedral, so he's throwing down their hammers and chisels. He even resorts to boiling some molten lead for them. That's a good way to get an upper hand in any battle. So, ironically though, if Quasimodo would have been completely successful, he would have betrayed Esmeralda in the process. And Jehan Frollo is killed in the battle, and Claude Frollo is of course utterly devastated by that, but not so utterly devastated that he still isn't psychotically horny for Esmeralda. He leads Esmeralda out the back of Notre Dame, and he offers her one last choice: accept my love or die. She, of course, refuses him, and so he sends her to the mercy of Sister Goudelet. Esmeralda is extremely rude to her, and when they find out that they are mother and daughter, you knew this was coming. I warned you this was coming. We all saw this was coming. The dancer is still very rude to her newly discovered mother. When the soldiers arrive at Sister Goudelet's tower to take Esmeralda, well, then all of a sudden the dancer loves her mother. She says, "Oh, mother, protect me." Which is interesting, because 5 minutes ago you just discovered she was your mother and you wanted nothing to do with her. But now, when it comes to being protected, you're changing your tune there. Goudelet does the best she can to fight off the soldiers, but eventually she's overpowered and Esmeralda is taken away. Esmeralda is sent to the gallows wearing a white dress. Quasimodo witnesses the whole thing from on top of Notre Dame, and in his anger, he throws Claude Frollo off of the parapet, and he falls to a horrible and mangly sort of death. Looking at the hanging corpse of Esmeralda and the mangled, mushed-up corpse of Claude Frollo, Quasimodo laments, "There lies everything that I have ever loved." The people, looking at Frollo's corpse and noticing that they had never seen Quasimodo ever since then, began to murmur that the demonic familiar had taken the soul of the sorcerer and alchemist back to hell. And the novel ends a few years later, where gravediggers are working and they discover Esmeralda's body in the white dress. Around her body is the skeleton of a hunchback. And as they move the skeleton of the hunchback of Quasimodo, his skeleton turns into dust and flies away. So, yeah, a nice little happy ending there. We definitely have the fatality thing going on there. So, that is the 1831 novel by Victor Hugo. So, yeah, I mean, I like the story. And I kind of like how he developed Claude Frollo's character. Frollo isn't just... I mean, he is a dangerous, monstrous, sex-crazed demon, but there is a little bit more to that as well. He wasn't born that way, and Hugo's poking fun at the church itself. He's criticizing establishments like the church, the aristocracy, and the monarchy. Hugo views these things as being enemies of freedom, creativity, and passion, and you would have to wonder if Frollo didn't end up in the church, would he have been a much better guy? Would Frollo have ended up more like Pierre Gringard? Oh, and by the way, whatever happened to Jolly the goat? Pierre Gringard ended up being the custodian of Jolly. Throughout the novel, Gringard has kind of a weird fascination with Jolly, so yeah, it's definitely something, but that's the novel. I like the story, I like the characters, but I don't like Phoebus or Esmeralda's character. This is by far the worst depiction of all of the media we're going to be taking a look at today. This is by far the worst that we have here with Phoebus and Esmeralda. And the actual writing is very, very verbose. He definitely takes a long while to get to his point. It didn't compel me, the actual writing style, Hugo's writing style, it didn't compel me all that much, so yeah. Good, no, I mean, it's a classic novel, but I've definitely read better classic novels, that is for certain. So now we're going to go ahead and discuss the 1923 Universal Super Jewel starring Lon Chaney as Quasimodo and Patsy Ruth Cline as Esmeralda. And this film was directed by Wallace Worsley, and it was the first film adaptation of The Hunchback of Notre Dame. And Lon Chaney, he did his own makeup. He would be referred to as the man of 1,000 faces. He always did his own makeup, and wow, that, I mean, even by today's standards, that is some really impressive makeup. So, yeah, he definitely knew what he was doing in terms of character creation and makeup development. And this would be the most expensive film of that time. Cost $1.25 million in 1923 money. I'm going to put up the absolutely appalling adjustment for inflation. But this was a Universal Super Jewel. So, in the silent days, Universal categorize their films in different ways, and a super jewel was the really big, important stuff, the show-stopping thing that you have to see because all your friends are going to be talking about it for a very long time. I don't think they had a rating for like, oh, this thing ain't no good, so you don't need to waste your time with it, but honestly, I kind of wish Universal would do something like that today. Have a rating, this ain't no good, don't waste your time, because that would have stopped me from watching Exorcist Believer. If you know, you know. Don't watch Exorcist Believer. That weren't no good. But the silent Hunchback of Notre Dame film is really, really good. It was actually the first time a public announcement system was used on the set of a feature film, and the film was mostly received well by critics, and it drew huge crowds. Proceeds of the premiere were donated to the American Legion's Fund for camp for veterans. And yeah, by and large, this is a really, really good film. There is kind of, it may be tempting to equate this with some of the German expressionist things we were seeing in Europe at the same time. And while there's probably a little bit of influence there, for the most part, Hollywood style and European expressionist style, German expressionist style, were pretty different. German expressionism was all about the technique and using hyperbole and crazy lighting and shadows, sets, editing to enhance the storytelling. In Hollywood, we were more about the technique needs to be kind of invisible. You almost want to create the fourth wall, a big, massive wall, and the audience is just magically looking through it and seeing exactly what was happening in 1482. So by and large, the Universal film does follow most of the actual plot points pretty closely. However, they do change a little bit of the characters. So instead of Claude Frollo committing all of the terrible atrocities, it's his little brother Jehan committing all of the atrocities, and Claude Frollo is the saintly archdeacon of Notre Dame. So clearly the makers of the film did not want to upset church-going Catholic viewers here. So they wanted to kind of go from the idea of, oh no, the clergyman, the man of the cloth, he's good. It's his crazy younger brother who's doing all of the horrible things that the clergyman in the novel did. And Jehan and Clopin kind of join forces. Clopin's main driving force behind the Universal film is to take down the aristocracy, which, while Hugo probably would have thought that was a really great thing, the actual film kind of presents this in a rather harsh and negative light, so I definitely can't see that going over too well with Victor Hugo. Lon Chaney, he was absolutely on point, and dude had some crazy moves too. Like, Lon Chaney was definitely... They don't make him like that anymore, that is for certain. And it was also kind of confusing for me. I thought Pierre Gringoire and Jehan looked way too similar, those characters. Maybe I'm just kind of derpy, but I feel like those characters looked way too similar throughout this film, so it kind of confused me a little bit. But, yeah, I really liked the torturing Esmeralda scene, and I'm not weird and creepy. I just think they recorded that really, really well, and that had kind of the German expressionist vibe a little bit. Not too much, but a little bit. Yeah, the torturing Esmeralda was pretty cool there, and yeah, by and large, a lot of the plot points stay mostly intact. So the battle for Notre Dame effectively begins when Jehan informs Clopin that the king had moved her execution up, and Clopin leads his forces to attack Notre Dame. Phoebus, recovering from his wounds, hears of Clopin's assault, and he alerts the king's men. Quasimodo throws out whatever he can to throw off Clopin's men, including the molten lead, and I think that was really nicely done in this film. The molten lead scene, that was some good stuff there. And the fight goes on, and Jehan assaults Esmeralda. Quasimodo finds Jehan attacking Esmeralda, and he yeets Jehan off of the parapet of Notre Dame. Phoebus returns to Esmeralda, and yeah, the main plot differences in the actual plot points occur in the actual battle for Notre Dame, where Quasimodo just dies and Phoebus ends up with Esmeralda, so that's substantially different from the novel, and of course the characterizations are vastly different as well. I don't think Victor Hugo would have been okay with Claude Frollo being the good guy and his little brother Jehan being the bad guy, but overall though, very, very good film. One of the masterpieces of the Hollywood silent age, and Lon Chaney, an absolute genius in makeup, so the silent Universal Hunchback of Notre Dame film mostly follows the plot points until the end, switches out the characters, which I think would displease Victor Hugo, but this film would definitely please any cinema aficionado. Up next, we are going to take a look at the 1996 Disney film, and this was directed by Gary Truesdale of Beauty and the Beast fame, and Kirk Wise, and it stars Tom Hulce and Demi Moore and Kevin Kline. And a little personal anecdote for the Disney's Hunchback of Notre Dame. On my first visit to Disneyland, they were promoting the Hunchback of Notre Dame film, and we got to meet all of the Hunchback of Notre Dame characters. It was really, really fun, and I just feel like this film gets tragically overlooked by so many Disney fans, and it really shouldn't because it's really, really good. And I absolutely love this film. This is probably one of the Disney hidden gems. It was a success with critics and a decent success at the box office. And of course, there were some protests and controversies with the film. Religious leaders, and namely people from the Southern Baptist Conference, protested the film, saying they didn't like the depiction of spirituality and religion and the church. These criticisms are completely unfounded in the film. It's definitely faith-affirming, and Victor Hugo's own descendants tore into the film, calling it a vulgar commercialization by unscrupulous salesmen. Which is also, like, really weird because I feel like this, of all the media we're going to take a look at today, the Disney film captures the essence of the Victor Hugo novel most perfectly. This captures the feeling, I think, that Hugo was trying to convey when he wrote the novel. We're going to see quite a few plot differences, so yeah, throughout a lot of this, my nose will be in my notebook here, but we're going to see substantial plot differences from the novel, but we're going to see the ideas being faithfully held up. We're going to... Okay, yeah, the church is depicted favorably. I think it's depicted favorably, which would irk Hugo and his descendants. But we have the monarchy, the aristocracy, and the conventional justice system being ridiculed and heavily, heavily criticized here. So let's just jump right on into the plot of the film. Substantially different, so I have to kind of like read the entire plot here. Forgive me, guys. Some people don't like it when I look at my notes, but whatever. The film begins with Clopin outside of Notre Dame reciting the story of Quasimodo. The Roma were escaping from Judge, not a clergyman, Judge Claude Frollo, and he's chasing a woman and her baby. Frollo kills the Roma woman and is about to throw her baby in a well, but the noble and saintly archdeacon, yes, the archdeacon, who I don't think actually has a name in the film, the archdeacon is depicted favorably here. The archdeacon commands Frollo to take the child and that they live in and that the child would live in Notre Dame. And Frollo would give Quasimodo the name Quasimodo, which in this context means half-formed. So remember when we were talking about Quasimodo infantes, so as newborn babes, almost in the fashion of, this is an actual legitimate interpretation here. Half-formed to mean Quasimodo, half-fashion there. We also have the anthropomorphic gargoyles named Laverne, and of course, Victor and Hugo, and, you know, while the novel doesn't say the gargoyles came to life and hung out with Quasimodo, this conveys the spirit of wanting to preserve the architecture of Notre Dame and wanting to keep the Gothic and medieval architectural structures alive, because they are alive and can interact, and it's something real and present, and something that should be respected. So the Disney film does a good job conveying that idea. It's so interesting that, that idea is able to actually be thoroughly developed in an animated feature there. And we also have Frollo reviewing the Alphabet of Damnation with Quasimodo. I just absolutely love that. And Frollo is pissed that Quasimodo wants to go to the Festival of Fools. And that's where we get the amazing song Out There. The music by Alan Menken is just absolutely top-notch for this film here. And then we see Phoebus and Esmeralda and Jolly. Phoebus stops guards from apprehending Esmeralda, and Frollo has a meeting with Phoebus, and Frollo wants him to destroy all of the Roma population and their haven at the Court of Miracles. And once we get into the actual Festival of Fools, we have the song Topsy-Turvy, and that's just an absolutely beautiful marriage of hand-drawn animation and computer-generated animation. And I really enjoy the Esmeralda dance. I never thought in my youth that I would see a Disney film where there is legit pole dancing. Demi Moore was actually in the film Striptease a little earlier that year, and yeah, never thought we'd actually see a Disney character straight up pole dancing, but, with some of the creative decisions that modern Disney's making, I can only imagine the day when Minnie Mouse saw Mickey Mouse's Clubhouse is straight up doing something on a pole. It's only a matter of time, really, but I digress. Quasimodo is crowned the King of Fools, and the same platform that they used to crown Quasimodo the King of Fools is used to punish and humiliate him, where they tie him to a rotating wheel. Esmeralda approaches Quasimodo to show him kindness and tenderness, so as they are mocking and ridiculing him, and she cusses out Claude Frollo for mistreating the Romani people. And I also really love the crazy heretic who is voiced by the director Gary Truesdale. This is just some good, wacky Disney entertainment. He always seems to be getting free, but he always ends up right back in a pickle. That's good stuff there. I like that kind of humor. And Phoebus and Esmeralda have a confrontation at Notre Dame, and this confrontation very quickly turns into flirting, as, a lot of my confrontations do. Frollo appears wanting to apprehend Esmeralda, but Phoebus says, no, she's claimed a sanctuary. And Frollo is, he can't violate the law of sanctuary, but he's definitely not chill with that, and his vendetta against Esmeralda and his lust for Esmeralda certainly isn't over. In her sanctuary prison/sanctuary time, Esmeralda has the number of God Help the Outcasts, which, you compare this to the prayer Snow White says in Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. You look at Snow White's prayer, and at first glance, Snow White seems to be very reverent and devout, but I wouldn't go along and say that Esmeralda isn't being devout. Sometimes prayers get a little sad. Sometimes there's a book in the Bible called Lamentations. Sometimes your soul is weary and you cry out to God. Look at the Psalms of Asaph in the Bible. I myself, I've had some prayers that weren't very polite. Always love and fear and respect God, but you should never be afraid to actually tell God what is weighing on your heart. And that's what Esmeralda's doing in this prayer. And Esmeralda finds Quasimodo's home in the bell tower, and she loves the little models he makes. As Quasimodo is making models of everyone and all of the buildings and architecture of Paris, and she finds that utterly endearing, as do I. And then Quasi leads Esmeralda out of the cathedral, and she gives him a woven band and saying, you hold this city when you hold this in your hand. So, I mean, smart guys can reasonably figure out that she gave him a makeshift map of Paris there. Phoebus has a small confrontation with Quasimodo, but his main message is he wants Quasimodo to tell Esmeralda that he's sorry. And then, oh my gosh, the song Hellfire. This is my favorite song in the entire film. Oh man. This is so good. If you guys know me and my tastes, you know Hellfire is right up my alley. I absolutely love it, and I think when people were religious leaders were criticizing the film, it was probably this song that they were pointing to, but it refers to the parable of the tax collector and the Pharisee. Claude Frollo is legitimately saying, I am better than everyone else because I'm so pure. That's exactly what the Pharisee said in the synagogue, and the poor sinning tax collectors in the back saying, forgive me, Lord, for I'm a sinner. And Christ says the tax collector is going to go home more fulfilled in his prayer. Hellfire just absolutely conveys the meaning of that parable and the meaning of religious hypocrisy. Chef's kiss on that. Totally up my alley there. And during that song, Frollo is informed that Esmeralda had escaped. Always when you're in the middle of a sick jam, someone has to inform you that something stupid happened. Frollo sends Phoebus and his men to apprehend Esmeralda and round up as many Roma people as he can, and he even wants Phoebus to go ahead and burn down some innocent people's houses, and when Phoebus refuses, then Phoebus is wanted by Frollo as well, and Phoebus dives into the river, and Esmeralda rescues him from drowning. Back in Notre Dame, the gargoyles cheer up Quasimodo with the number, A Guy Like You. And Esmeralda returns and asks him to hide the wounded Phoebus. She kisses Phoebus, and Quasi is heartbroken when he sees that. Esmeralda and Jolly leave Quasimodo's hideout, and Phoebus hides. Frollo decides to have a meal with Quasimodo, and he tells he knows where the Romani hideout is. Phoebus leaves to warn the Court of Miracles, and Quasi feels bad about the decision. It's that classic Disney thing of Phoebus is going out to try to save the Romani people from Claude Frollo, but he's doing the classic Disney protagonist thing of, oh, I don't know, I don't got what it takes, I'm just going to stay here, and it's like, but we thought you were going to do some action here, Quasimodo. It's the classic Disney thing there, but Quasimodo joins up with Phoebus, and using the woven band that Esmeralda gave Quasimodo, they find out the location of the Court of Miracles, and we have the really cool introduction to the Court of Miracles, and they want to go ahead and hang Quasimodo and Phoebus. Esmeralda arrives to save them, and Phoebus warns them that Claude Frollo is coming, and sure enough, Claude Frollo arrives, and he says, oh, I have Quasimodo to thank for showing me the location of this hideout, because I didn't know where it was. I just followed you, buddy, and here I am. And at the square, they are getting ready to burn Esmeralda at the stake. Quasimodo is chained up, but Quasimodo breaks his chains, and he swoops down, rescues Esmeralda, and claims sanctuary. And this the way the Disney film portrays this really captures, I think, the spirit that Victor Hugo was trying to come upon in the novel there. The visuals, the audio, it all comes together beautifully to really convey the heroic saving of Esmeralda, and that she has a final hope of possibly getting her sentence commuted here at Notre Dame. So, yeah, it is absolutely stellar. And now we have the Battle of Notre Dame. Phoebus and the people of Paris are with Quasimodo and the Romani people, and Frollo and his king's men are fighting against Phoebus, the people of Paris, the Romani, and Quasimodo. The visuals, you know, when Victor Hugo was describing the Battle of Notre Dame, the Disney film actually puts those words into perfect visual. This is really incredible how they pulled all of this off. The marriage of hand-drawn animation, computer-generated animation. It doesn't get much better than this, guys. Quasi checks on Esmeralda, and it seems like she's dead. Oh, this is one of those classic Disney things. Oh no, is the girl getting ready to die? And Frollo comes in to gloat a little bit, and Frollo tries to stab Quasimodo, but Esmeralda wakes up, and Quasimodo runs off with her. Quasimodo lies Esmeralda down in his hideout, and Claude Frollo comes in to gloat about everything that's happening, and it's here that Frollo reveals all of the horrible things he did when Quasimodo was a baby. And Frollo tries to stab Quasimodo, but Esmeralda wakes up and wards him off. Quasimodo runs off with Esmeralda. In trying to finish Esmeralda off, Claude Frollo falls to his death, and if you ever wanted to literally see someone literally falling into hell, the Disney Hunchback of Notre Dame has you covered. This is how you get rid of a bad guy right here, guys. And, of course, Quasi loses his footing as well, but Phoebus is there to catch and save them. Phoebus and Esmeralda share a triumphant kiss, and all three, Quasimodo, Phoebus, and Esmeralda, walk out of the cathedral on a bright, sunny day. And that is the conclusion of the Disney Hunchback of Notre Dame film. An absolute masterpiece of animated cinema, a tragically underrated Disney gem. I absolutely love this. The plot was substantially different from the Victor Hugo novel, but I feel like it beautifully captures the spirit of the Victor Hugo novel. So, you know, is it more important to get the Universal film? It got most of the plot points correct, but it strayed from the spirit. But the Disney film missed a lot of the plot points, but it nailed the spirit. Which is more important? But I will say, I am a little bit bummed out that the Disney film did not have Pierre Gringoire. I really like Pierre Gringoire. He's a really great character. I don't know, maybe we didn't need Clopin singing the introduction. We could have added Gringoire, like have Gringoire and Clopin being like almost like a Timon and Pumbaa kind of situation. I don't know. I feel like Disney could have done really great things with Gringoire's character, so a missed opportunity there, but, I mean, they capture everything else so perfectly, so, yeah, the lack of Gringoire is a little disconcerting, but it doesn't really hamper my love for the film, and let's be real, how much does Gringoire actually add to the story? I like him, but this film certainly doesn't suffer without him, so I don't know, guys, but I'm a Gringoire stan, but this Disney adaptation of Hunchback of Notre Dame, absolute gem, absolute masterpiece. So the final piece of Quasimodo-related media that we're going to look at today is the 1836 opera La Esmeralda by Louise Bertin. And the circumstances around this opera were really kind of crazy, and it definitely reinforces the theme of fatality throughout the story of the Hunchback of Notre Dame. So the composer, Louise Bertin, was the only composer to work directly with the Victor Hugo in the development of the opera. Hugo, of course, writing the libretto for this opera himself. Meyerbeer and Hector Berlioz were also in the running for developing an opera for Hunchback of Notre Dame, but it ultimately went to Louise Bertin. And it took forever for the work to be produced. Bertin, who was partially paralyzed from birth, could not really attend the rehearsals, so the opera's conductor, who of course was the composer Hector Berlioz, led all of the rehearsing efforts. And Berlioz, in a letter to Franz Liszt, said that the whole scene of the rehearsals was an inferno, an ice-cold inferno. And the audience was pretty hostile to the piece even before the premiere. They said that Bertin only got the gig to compose this opera because her brother Armand was connected to the French government's opera commission. And they were also upset that her father was connected to the French political newspaper Journal des Débats, and Victor Hugo and Hector Berlioz were also contributors to this publication. And one thing we need to bear in mind is that Hugo's novel was on the list of banned publications published by the Catholic Church, but if you're developing an opera, you want to make sure people are seeing the opera, and having it being based on a novel that was on the list of banned publications from the Catholic Church probably isn't the best look, so a few revisions had to be made within the opera, specifically referring to Claude Frollo as a priest. Now, when we jump into the plot, we're going to see, no, Claude Frollo is definitely a priest, but it took me a while listening to the opera to actually get to that conclusion, so it is definitely veiled in a little more riddle and mystery, but I think most logical people will be able to conclude Claude Frollo as a priest, and apparently it was initially way more explicit, and the actors and talent on stage forgot which words were banned and which words weren't. And at the premiere itself, it was a total fiasco. Alexandre Dumas, the author of The Three Musketeers, stood up in the middle of the performance and shouted, "It's by Berlioz!" And a whole lot of other audience members joined in, screaming, "It's by Berlioz!" Hector Berlioz was the conductor of the first 6 shows. The show only had the opera only had 6 shows and performances, where at the 6th show, a riot ensued for people who were very much against Louise Bertin and her family, and the 4-act opera was reduced down to 3, and they ultimately had to, the venue that put it on, the Theatre of the Royal Academy of Music, the venue ultimately canceled the rest of the 6th show and put on the ballet Les Filles du Danube to fill up the rest of the time. So, fatality, definitely a theme throughout this opera. Louise Bertin, she never composed another opera again. She would go on and compose quite a lot of other things, and only a small smattering of those would gain any traction, some symphonies and chamber pieces and concertos, but this was her last venture into opera. And even Victor Hugo himself had misgivings about the production. He kind of resented how the Romani beggar characters were dressed in really elaborate and ornate gowns, and This is kind of the thing, though, with French opera. Things need to be grand and in your face and really spectacular. That's how French grand opera rolls, even though I think technically this may not count as technical grand opera because it's only 4 acts and there is no ballet in the middle of it, so I think technically it rules it out of French grand opera category, but it's very much in the style of our great composers of the French opera. It is heavily reminiscent of Meyerbeer, but Victor Hugo, he kind of resented the fact that the poor characters were dressed practically like nobility. And Hugo's 5th daughter, Adele, she wrote of all of the other weird things that just kind of happen with people connected to this opera. So remember, Bertin, her career pretty much kind of stalled after the disastrous release of this opera. And Adele Hugo wrote that Cornélie Falcon, who played Esmeralda, the lead, she permanently lost her voice a few years later, and she was a staple in Meyerbeer's cast of characters. She was in the premiere of Robert the Devil. She was heavily involved in the Meyerbeer circles, and anyone who knows about Meyerbeer, he has these notes that I think just straight up torture poor sopranos. The whole classic thing of the shattering of a glass, opera singer shattering the glass, a lot of that could very easily be done with some of those notes Meyerbeer wants his sopranos to hit. And Cornélie Falcon, who played Esmeralda in the debut of this opera, she would ultimately lose her voice. And Adolphe Nourrit, who played Phoebus, he threw himself off of a balcony in Italy a few years later and died. And a ship named Esmeralda was lost at sea, cargo and all, sailing in between England and Ireland. So definitely a lot of weird circumstances regarding fatality and just tragic luck for people connected to this performance. And we don't really hear a whole lot out of this opera. This opera was largely neglected. Most of what we get is from the manuscripts from Franz Liszt and Hector Berlioz. The original manuscript that she wrote is, I think it's missing or lost, so what we know of the opera now is from reconstructions by Liszt and Berlioz. And what I used was from a 2008 recording from, oh boy, the Orchestre National de Montpellier, Languedoc, Roussillon. I know I butchered that, but and it was uploaded with subtitles. Thank God this user uploaded subtitles to YouTube. It was by the YouTube user. Oh, come on! I can't even pronounce this. Gluglotte? Gluglotte. So, yeah. But thank you to the YouTube user for uploading this with English subtitles. That was quite a bit of help for me in this discussion here. So with all of this bad luck surrounding this piece, you guys are probably thinking, oh wow, I bet this opera is pretty lousy, right? It actually slaps. This is a really good opera, and it's tragic that it got so much hate, and I don't see why it did get so much hate, because it's really, really good. This is a quality piece of work right here, so I don't know what the actual complaint was. It probably is just personal vendettas against her, alleged feelings of nepotism, misogyny, all of that horrible stuff going against a very talented composer and a very amazing work. So let's dive in and jump into all of the good stuff here in this opera. So Act 1, we're in the Court of Miracles at night. And the beggars of Paris are singing the praises of Clopin, the king of the beggars. And the role of Clopin is sung by a tenor. And Frollo, who is sung, of course, obviously, Frollo's the bad guy, so he's got to be a baritone. And he's disgusted by all of the revelry of the Festival of Fools. And Esmeralda enters dancing. Of course, Esmeralda is a soprano there. And Quasimodo, who is also sung by a tenor, which I think is kind of an interesting thing there to make Quasimodo a tenor, because he has the scary, grotesque appearance, but he has the soft, gentle tenor kind of voice, so that's kind of an interesting move on Bertin's part there. But Quasimodo recently made the Pope of Fools, is joining the celebration, and Frollo enters and he's absolutely furious at Quasimodo. The beggars want to kill Frollo right then and there, but Clopin intervenes on Frollo's behalf, and Clopin asks Frollo what he wants, and he wants Esmeralda. We also learn that Clopin is kind of a student of Frollo in the dark arts, which, it's interesting because Victor Hugo wrote the libretto for this, so it's weird that we have Clopin teaming up with Frollo, so maybe the Universal Studios adaptation, a silent film adaptation, wasn't that far out of touch, but it's interesting that Clopin is definitely working with Frollo, and again, Frollo is mentioned as a student of the dark and magical arts, so apparently Hugo really had that as a priority, of Claude Frollo being a sorcerer. And Frollo has an awesome soliloquy singing about how he's tortured with lust. Honestly, I think this Act 1 soliloquy of Frollo is kind of one of the shining moments of the opera. There's another shining moment in Act 4, which we'll get to when we get to Act 4, but I really love this soliloquy here. This soliloquy is really, really good, and it hits a lot of really great notes, the melody, the rhythm, that is some good stuff there. I love that soliloquy. And Quasimodo and Frollo have a duet as they wait to kidnap Esmeralda. And then enters Phoebus, of course is sung by a tenor, and Phoebus stops them, and Frollo escapes, and the archers capture Quasimodo. Phoebus and Esmeralda have a loving duet, and he gives her a scarf. This is going to pop up in the next act. And Phoebus and Esmeralda absolutely love this evening, and tomorrow, though, they're going to have a misfortune. Esmeralda leaves Phoebus alone, and the act ends with Phoebus and the Night Watch. So that's Act 1 of La Esmeralda. So Act 2, Scene 1. Act 2 has a couple scenes in it, so Act 2, Scene 1 is the, oh boy, Place de G-R-E with the backward accent mark, V-E, I'm not even going to try that one. We see Quasimodo is in the stacks for attempting to kidnap Esmeralda. And the chorus mentions Quasi is deaf, and they jeer at him, so I think that's kind of cool that they actually wrote a deaf character in an opera. That's such an interesting dynamic, and with Quasimodo singing some very beautiful melodies here, and having him be deaf, I find that very interesting and intriguing. And Quasimodo calls for water, and Esmeralda gives him some. Quasimodo is untied and taken away. Then, in the next scene, we are at the home of Fleur de Lis, which is Captain Phoebus's betrothed. And Phoebus is engaged to her, and she, of course, is sung by a soprano. And her mother is upset that he's not around very often. And she says, when you get married, you can sulk afterwards. Phoebus is left alone, and he reflects on his love for Esmeralda. Guests start arriving for the reception, and some of the lady guests notice Esmeralda outside of the window dancing on the streets. And the attendees want Phoebus to go ahead and call her up and see some really sick dancing there. And Fleur is kind of freaked out that Esmeralda responds so quickly to the request to come up to Phoebus. Esmeralda dances and takes out Phoebus's scarf, and Fleur is absolutely filled with dread because, that kind of showed that he was hanging out with another girl and not being super faithful, and everyone starts turning against Esmeralda, and Phoebus is on Esmeralda's side. Everyone at the party wants Esmeralda to leave, and basically this party ends in a total bust, and that is how the act ends, with the party just kinda crumbling down there. So for Act 3, we are outside of a tavern, and Phoebus and his men are drinking and carousing. They're singing a quirky little song to Saint Lo, and Claude Frollo enters in kind of in the shadows, and he hides away from all of the characters, but he's definitely keeping his eye on Phoebus. Phoebus is singing about how he has a really hot date with Esmeralda and how hot she is. And then the curfew bell sounds, and I love how in opera, Phoebus goes on and he sings, "I'm running late," and the chorus says, "You're running late," and this happens so much in opera, and I just love it, how a character will sing, "I'm running late, you're running late," and they'll sing like 30 measures about how late the character's running, and the character won't go, though, because he's still singing, "I'm running late," and he just keeps singing how late he is. This kind of happens at the end of the Rosenkavalier, how the bad guy says, "Do you want me to go?" And they're like, "Yes!" And he says, "I'll go if you want me to." And everyone's like, "Yes, we want you to go." It's just one of those quirky little things that can only happen in opera. Because in real life, if you're running late, you'd be like, "Oh my god, I'm running late, I gotta hurry up and get this thing done." But in opera, the rules work a little bit differently there. Frollo stops Phoebus, and he tells him that Esmeralda will kill him, and Phoebus straight up ignores him. And Frollo warns Phoebus to believe the rumors about them, referring to the Romani people. So, yeah, we have a nice little bit of prejudice there. So, don't believe what you see with your own eyes, your own relationships, or your own experiences. Believe the rumors that you hear, folks. Clopin enters the scene as well, and he helps keep Frollo hidden. And when Esmeralda enters the scene, she declares her love for Phoebus, and then Frollo overhears the romantic duet between Phoebus and Esmeralda, and he has a really beautiful quote of, "Fairy or woman, be my lady." He's absolutely tormented that Phoebus is going to land Esmeralda, and creepy old prejudicial judge is not. After the exchange, Frollo stabs Phoebus, and, he reveals himself. Yep, Frollo was definitely hanging out there, and Esmeralda faints on Phoebus's body. So, moving on to Act 4, Scene 1. We're in the prison. Esmeralda is in jail, mourning Phoebus. The stem of our days is snapped while it's still green. She also says a prayer in the cell. Frollo enters wearing the robes of a priest. Again, at this point, they've never actually established that Frollo is a priest, but they aren't saying that this is actually a disguise, so it's enough to where if you were an opera goer in 1830s Paris, you would really wonder who and what Frollo is, you would probably be more convinced to assume that Frollo is a sorcerer more than anything else, but regardless, he enters and says he's here to hear Esmeralda's final confession. And he eventually reveals himself as for who he truly is, and he declares his love for her, and she can either accept this love or refuse it, and of course, she refuses. The scene then changes to the square outside of Notre Dame. Quasimodo is professing his love for the cathedral. He hates how deformed he is. Noble blade, vile scabbard, in my soul I'm handsome. And he sings about how he absolutely loves the bells, and he begins ringing the bells. Not like you'd be able to hear any bell ringing, because for some reason, how competent and really amazing this opera has been, Louise Bertin misses a huge opportunity by having a bell section in the song where Quasimodo is singing about how much he likes bells. This is a slow pitch down the middle, and she missed it! Oh, gosh, it just would have been so cool if she could have added in a nice little sequence of the bells of Notre Dame sounding. That would have been just beautiful beyond words, and she missed the opportunity! Gah! Great opera, I absolutely love it, but this was frustrating that we didn't have a beautiful flourish and crescendo of bells. Ugh. Don't get me started, and well, I am started, but that's where I am with the bells there. So, after Quasimodo's bell chorus with the suspicious lack of bells, Frollo and Clopin enter, and Quasimodo hides in a recess. Clopin says that Phoebus did not die, but he is being held a good distance away from Notre Dame, and that the journey back to Notre Dame would probably be enough to kill him. Clopin plans to rip Esmeralda from the hangman and bring her to Frollo. Really great orchestral interlude at this moment when they're bringing Esmeralda up to the hangman, and really great orchestral interlude and a really beautiful choral piece based on the book of Jonah, chapter 2, verse 3, sung in Latin. This, for as angry as I was about the lack of bells in the bell song, this more than makes up for it. This was otherworldly in how beautifully she rendered this. This is an absolute treasure, this portion in the fourth act of La Esmeralda. And it's interesting because in the sixth performance, the audience didn't get to hear this really sweet gem. And for me, this is one of this and Frollo's first act soliloquy, these are the defining moments of the opera right here. Esmeralda sings about how she will soon join Phoebus, because remember, she believes that Phoebus is still dead, and Frollo and Clopin react sadly. Frollo reveals himself, and if she professes her love for him, he can still save her. He still has time to save her. And of course, she refuses, and he starts saying prayers for her soul. She is turned to the secular arm. This is the line that kind of makes me think, oh, Frollo was actually a priest throughout the opera? This is really the only clear indication Hugo gives in his libretto that Frollo might have actually been an official cleric in the opera. And again, they're trying to, downplay Frollo's religious role because they didn't want to upset the Catholic opera-goers in France. And Quasimodo grabs Esmeralda, takes her to the church, and calls out sanctuary. She belongs to God. And yeah, Bertin did a very nice job rendering this, but I gotta say, Disney definitely out-tricked her on it, but it's still very nicely done. It just doesn't have the same oomph as the Disney film, but she did fine rendering this here. But Frollo replies that Notre Dame can only save a Christian, so sanctuary only applies to Christians, and Esmeralda, being Romani, would not technically fall under that, which is totally absurd because we heard her praying, so she definitely believes in something there, so she believes enough, I think, that Notre Dame could definitely be a legit option for saving her. Phoebus does arrive, and his testimony is enough to exonerate Esmeralda. He's badly wounded, he's in bad shape, and Esmeralda rushes to Phoebus, but he's in bad shape from that wound. And as Clopin said, that journey from where he was being hidden to Notre Dame really was enough to do him in. So he dies from the aggravation of his wounds caused by that arduous journey. And Frollo and the rest of the chorus sing Fatalité. And that is the opera, so a nice, happy ending there. Overall, I really enjoyed this opera. This was a really good opera, a tragically underrated piece of French opera from the 1830s. And I know I'm a little salty that there weren't any bells in the bell song, but overall, I think Louise Bertin did a phenomenal job with this opera, and it's really interesting. Phoebus is actually the star of this opera. He has the most screen time of any of the characters, stage time of any of the characters, and Bertin did such a really great job writing roles and parts for the male voice. I mentioned that my favorite portions were the chorus as Esmeralda was being led up to the hangman, and Claude Frollo's Act 1 soliloquy. So it's very interesting to note that a female composer had such a grasp and understanding of what the male voice could do. She really knocked it out of the park in terms of the opera just in general, but with the male voices in particular. She really understood how to write really great roles for the male voice. So phenomenal work, La Esmeralda by Louise Bertin. And that actually concludes all of our Quasimodo-related media. So in conclusion, I'm going to go ahead and rank everything we looked at today. My favorite thing that we looked at today was the Disney film. The visuals, the songs, the emotion, the spirit, captured very beautifully in the Disney film. And then the opera, La Esmeralda. Very talented composer, tragically underrated, and it's so tragic that this opera did not gain more traction, and it's not more of a staple in opera houses throughout the world, but I absolutely love this piece. It was really, really phenomenal. I really enjoyed it. And then my next bottom one after La Esmeralda would be the Universal film. A very great film, a very beautiful architecture. They really went all out to bring the 1482 Paris scenery alive. Some of the ending, though, and I like how it followed the novel for the most part, but that ending was really weird. The ending almost felt rushed, and it was weird. So the ending left me a little hollow, it felt a little lacking there at the end, but still a very great film. And then my bottom thing would actually be the novel itself. I enjoyed how Hugo developed the character of Claude Frollo, but by and large, he almost totally forgot to develop Phoebus's character, and just how wordy the novel is. It's very verbose, almost pretentious in a lot of ways. And, yeah, I love the story, and I love how he developed his characters, but, yeah, overall, it just... The novel itself wasn't the most captivating classical literature read that I've ever experienced. And that's it for Quasimodo Sunday. I know there were several other operas that were composed based on the story of the Hunchback of Notre Dame. I know there were several other films based on the story as well. I think there was one starring Anthony Quinn, and you know, maybe it wouldn't be an every year thing, because I'm only human, but I might do some more Quasimodo Sunday videos. Let me know if you guys would be interested in seeing Quasimodo Sunday be more of like a regular thing that we do here on Beagle Rampant Productions. Anyway, that's it for this year's Quasimodo Sunday. Thank you guys so much for watching. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. You know you're the best fans of any YouTuber in the world, and we will catch you later with some more fun and crazy antics here on Beagle Rampant Productions. I wish you a blessed and peaceful and happy Easter, springtime, Quasimodo season. May you guys do well, and may the good Lord bless and keep you guys. Bye! Au revoir!